Just like behaviorism was a reaction to introspection, cognitive psychology was a reaction to the limitations posed by behaviorism and its relentless need to observe only objective measures. It ignored mental processes, evolutionary history, and so we wanted to move a little farther forward into cognitive psychology. This is the study of mental processes, including perception, thought, memory, and reasoning. One of the things behaviorism couldn't tackle were illusions. And illusions are errors of perception, memory, or judgment in which subjective experience differs from objective reality. Max Wertheimer studied the induced motion phenomenon and founded Gestalt psychology. And this is a psychological approach that emphasizes that we often perceive the whole rather than the sum of its parts. Now, he discovered this while traveling on a train, but I'm going to show you another example of induced motion. Although you may believe that these circles are moving and they're part of an animation, they're actually part of a still image, and the induced motion is being caused by perceptual processes in our brain, or our attempt to organize what we're seeing into something that we understand. Some key figures in the field of cognition are Sir Frederick Bartlett. He believed that human memories are reconstructed and flawed. Hermann Ebbinghaus, who believed that human memories are accurate representations of past events. And Elizabeth Loftus, who believed that the very act of remembering changes the original memory. Imagine if every time you remembered something, when you put it away, it was a little bit different. You don't have to imagine it because it actually is. If you think of Sir Frederick Bartlett, he's associated with the story of two ghosts. If you think of Hermann Ebbinghaus, he's associated with the forgetting curve. And Elizabeth Loftus is associated with false memories. There are a lot of things that neither cognition, nor behaviorism, nor biology, nor physiology, nor psychodynamic theory, nor humanism can explain. And these fall into a subfield of psychology that studies the causes and consequences of interpersonal behavior, and that's social psychology. Social psychology is part of a greater field of social, cultural, and community perspectives. At the end of the day, human beings are social animals, and psychology is influenced by the presence and absence of other people. Some founding fathers within the field of culture and community are Kenneth Clark. He discovered that implicit knowledge about the world is modified by cultural expectations in children as young as 3 years old. Solomon Asch conducted a series of studies on authority and obedience. Solomon Asch conducted a series of studies on authority and obedience. In other words, what would you be willing to do if somebody in authority told you you should? Gordon Allport studied stereotyping, prejudice, and racism in the context that they are perceptual errors. The other thing that led to the development of cognitive psychology as a field was technology. During World War II, the military needed help understanding the human interface and how it was going to interface with technology. And they wondered, is computer programming like human information processing? Some founding fathers here in this area are Donald Broadbent, and he believed that attention had limited capacity. George Miller, who believed that there were capacity limits in memory. And Treisman, who believed that perceptual processes constrained our attentional abilities. Noam Chomsky, who believed that different species were specialized for language. If you want to associate these names with quick words, Donald Broadbent is associated with the bottleneck. George Miller is associated with the concept of 7 plus or minus 2. Anne Treisman is associated with perceptual binding. And Noam Chomsky is associated with the language acquisition device. The first generation of computers. The first generation of computers was in the 1950s. Commodore Grace Hopper wrote COBOL, and as an aside, she found the very first computer bug. It was a moth. Brain meets mind. Cognitive neuroscience arises. Carl Lashley lesioned rats' brains to unsuccessfully localize learning. In other words, he took that great step forward saying, hey, we know there's something in the brain that's connected to what's going on in our behavior, but even if you cut a rat's brain apart, you don't find learning. And this led to physiological psychology. If you want to associate a word with him, you might associate the word engram. The neurosciences are broadly divided into two subfields: behavioral neuroscience, and this is an approach to psychology that links psychological processes to activities in the nervous system and other bodily processes, so kind of linking the brain to the body. Cognitive neuroscience, on the other hand, is a field that attempts to understand the links between cognitive processes and brain activity. So taking a look at cognitive processes and how that is revealed through activity in the human brain. The adaptive mind, evolutionary psychology emerges. Remember that functionalism began around the late 1800s, and now here we are in the 2000s. Evolutionary psychology is a psychological approach that explains mind and behavior in terms of the adaptive value of abilities that are preserved over time by natural selection. It sounds brilliant. Here's the problem. You can't test predictions made by evolutionary psychology. So, no matter how good a story sounds about evolutionary psychology, it's still a story. And then finally, let's get to the emergence of cultural psychology. Cultural psychology is the study of how cultures reflect and shape the psychological processes of their members. We used to, as a field, believe in absolutionism. And this is the idea that culture makes little difference on psychology. Well, over the last 10 years, psychologists have been taken back to school. We have learned about relativism and its importance. Psychological phenomena are likely to vary considerably across cultures. We've learned this because we're now a globally interconnected world, and although we share similarities globally, we also share differences in our personalities, in our beliefs, and how we perceive the world. Some people who were early leaders in this field were Herman George Kennedy, who looked at the impact of living conditions on subsequent IQ performance. And then Mamie Phipps Clark, who looked at cultural biases in intelligence testing. Now, I told you a little bit about how culture affects our perceptions. Which line do you think here is longer, the top or the bottom line? most of us, but not all of us, see the top line as longer. Europeans show greater error rates than non-Europeans. The difference seemed to be based on city versus rural architecture. If you weren't exposed to these vertical and horizontal lines of city architecture, then you were less likely to be fooled by that illusion on the former page. So when I say culture and community changes your perspectives, I mean at a very fundamental level. It changes what you're able to see. It changes what you hear. And so these are the major themes in psychology, and we're going to explore them throughout this semester.